Hi, today on my channel I would like to review A Time of Dread by Gwynne. This is the first book of a trilogy of Blood and Bone, the second book being A Time of Blood and A Time of Courage. This is a sequel to another series of books that I very much enjoyed, The Faith of the Fallen. If you haven't read The Faith of the Fallen, I very much recommend it, but I will tell you this, which I really liked about what I see in the first book of this new trilogy. You don't have to have read the first 4 books to understand what's going on. It may help you better understand the world, but Gwynne does a good job for even new readers of the Banished Lands to understand this world. The main thing about this book is it's 100 years after the end of the first 4 books, The Faith of the Fallen. Now, Faith of the Fallen, I'm not going to give any spoilers if you haven't read it, but let's just say that the continued struggles go on, and the fight between the Menelim, which are angelic winged warriors from another world that are now in the Banished Lands, and the Kadoshim, they're enemies, completely enemies, kind of like demons and angels. They're also winged, and both of these otherworldly creatures, they are fighting to have control of the Banished Lands. And what you have then is you have everybody else deciding which side to be on. Are they going to be on Team Menelim or Team Kadoshim? And so, like The Faith in the Fallen, if you're familiar with Gwynne's works, you have four. You have multiple POVs, and with the POVs, there's 4 of them, and then in A Time of Dread, which I like. One of the complaints I had about The Faith of the Fallen, until you got used to it, is there were so many different POVs. So he did a good job of focusing on just 4, and I'll go over them with you. The first one is Bleda. And Bleda is from a warrior class of a tribe, let's say. And it begins with Bleda watching a battle between his tribe and a warring tribe of theirs that they've been fighting back and forth between the Syrics and the Sirens, both horse warrior tribes, and they're having a battle. And the battle is because the Sirens had killed Bleda's father. So he's sitting afar on a mountain watching this battle go on between these 2 tribes. And the Menelim show up. Now, the Menelim doesn't take sides. They just stop the battle and the war between these 2 tribes. And Bleda becomes a ward as part of keeping the peace, if you would. Political prisoner, if you would, with the Menelim to keep the peace. But first, he gets to see his brother and sister get beheaded. So obviously he's not too happy with the Menelim at this time and feels himself as a prisoner. There's a great And this is kind of what John Gwynne does. I'll read this little quote here. Quotation from the book itself. And this is the Ben Alim. There will be peace in the land of the faithful. There is only one enemy, only one foe, who shall be fought, the Kadashim, and their followers. So in a sense, the Ben Alim, they are peacekeepers, but there's only one thing you should be fighting, they believe, and that is their dreaded rivals, the Kadashim. And so they just, any other type of, two warring tribes going at it, they'll take care of it in a bloody fashion, and they won't really care. Their main thing is just fighting the Kadashim. They're worried about the Kadashim and the Ben Alim way of life. Now, the second POV you have is Drem. Now, Drem and his father, they're trappers. And they are in the desolation, they call it, Bonefells. And they're trappers, they live in the wilderness. They trap and they take the furs and take them home after many months. They're living off the grid, if you'd say. They don't like the Ben Alim. They're trying to get away from them. Their tyranny at the Ben Alim. And they're trying to find freedom, just live their lives and not deal with the Ben Alim at all. And on their journey, they find a piece of starstone, and that changes everything. And their little world, by the end, becomes very, very much bigger. And that's the one thing about John Gwynne you'll always find that I always like, that I'm finding that, as with The Faith in the Fallen and this series of books, I hope it'll continue. I've only read the first book, but I very much plan on reading the other two books, and I will give reviews of those also. That it starts small, and then it becomes so much bigger by the end of the book of what's going on. So they find a black rock, part of the Starstone, and that changes everything for Drem and his father Olin. And so after they're done trapping, getting their furs, they go back to their community. There's a village called Kiergaard. But when they come back, they notice something's different. There are a lot more people there, because there are a lot of people that have, in a sense, made an exodus away from the areas of the Banished Land that are governed by the Ben Alim. And they also were looking supposedly for freedom, what have you. You'll find out other things are going on. But I'm not going to spoil anything on that end. There's also, with Drem and Olin, there is a wonderful, and this is the thing about John, every once in a while with John Gwynne's works, he just some beautiful prose. And it's after Drem had to fight some thugs and some villagers. And one thing is, Olin always keep telling him, you don't want to fight. You always want to use your words first. And here's what Drem says to his father, because his father actually beats them up and beats up the thugs. But here's what he says in the book. What about kind and polite words fixing a disagreement? Drum wheezed at Olin, his mouth thick with the copper tang of blood, his split nose throbbing, pulsing with his heartbeat. There's a time for that, Olin said. But sometimes, son, the only answer is blood and steel. So we have the POV of Drum and what he's going through. And then you have Riva. Riva she lives in Dressel. That is what you would call the capital of the Benalim, if you want to say it. That's their capital. And her big thing is she is a great warrior. Not very good with the bow. And someone's going to help her with that to come better with the bow, as you'll find out in the story. But she always wanted to be a white wing, like her mother and her sister. And the white wings are they're kind of like the army, I would say, of the Benalim. They're soldiers. But the problem is she's very hot-tempered, and she has a hard time getting through her warrior trials. It doesn't help when you punch in the face the Lord Protector Ezebral of the Benalim during your trial. And she will certainly, as you read her arc and her POV, you will certainly see changes that go on, and how she feels about the Benalim. And some friendships that bloom. I'll leave it there, though. Once again, no spoilers. Sometimes it's hard when you do a review of not giving spoilers. And then there's a next POV I want to talk about is Sig. Now, Sig is a giantess. She is part of the Bright Order of the Bright Star. They also fight the Benalim, but there's a rift between these two, between the Benalim and the Order of the Bright Star. And you have to read Faith of the Fallen to understand where that rift is. But so you have her story, and she rides around, and that's the one thing about John Gwynne of the Faith and the Fallen. There are some familiar characters, even though it's 100 years later. Of course, there's no humans that were in the Faith of the Fallen, but giants live a long time. Benalim and Kadashim, they're in the book. They live a very long time. So Sig, who's also in the Faith and the Fallen, she's one of the POVs, and she's starting to get worried that the Kadashim are becoming more active again. So my overall impressions of A Time of Dread by John Gwynne, I'll give you my positives. It's such an improvement, I think. I mean, he's getting better and better. And that's one of the things I always love about reading books of authors, is how they improve, usually from book to book. I like the idea that there are only 4 POVs. It's more focused. As mentioned earlier, that's one of my things. When I first read John Gwynne, I said, how am I going to get through this? When I read The Faith of the Fallen, the first book, Malice. Because they're just too many POVs. Um, the other thing, I think, because he's really honed in on the multiple POV in that his battle scenes are terrific. They're easy to follow. And I think that's really because he's focused on that one POV as part of the battle and the battle scene through that POV. Um, it is great. The battle scenes are great. And I think that's what I always come back with John Gwynne in his books. His battle scenes are terrific. They're bloody because of the POVs. You get to know the characters. So you really care what happens during the fights. And there are several battles in these books. And in this one too. And lastly, it's just he does so good of building suspense. It makes you want to read the next chapter, read the next chapter, and the next chapter. Very few authors I've found where you can put the book down. But with John Gwynne, this book here, I read in a couple days. I couldn't get enough of it. I had to know what happened next. Now, let me give you some of my, not criticism, I would say, but the couple things I didn't like about it. The first is actually, it's how he does POVs. As I mentioned, he builds suspense in each chapter, which is from one POV, and then he'll switch to another POV. The problem I found, and maybe it's not that much of where it's a criticism, but something you have to be aware of. You will get to the end of a chapter with a certain group of characters. It'll end on a cliffhanger. And then he switches to another POV. And then you have to wait a while to find out, well, what happened next with that group of characters? Just a minor thing. But you'll definitely feel it. Sometimes I felt like maybe I should just find where that POV continues on in the book. What chapters that is like Drem. Oh, Drem's on this chapter. Oh, when's the next Gem chapter? Maybe I'll just read it by chapters of the POVs in order. No, don't do that though. I mean, there's so much good here. I mean, any book, and this is my enjoyment with reading, any book that makes you want to keep reading it is a joy. And then the time just flies by as you're reading it. So I thank John Gwynne for that. The other minor criticism I have of this is that, and I think I know why the author did it. He did it because he didn't want to ruin the surprises that happen. But really, this book, all the POVs are somewhat, if you want to say, you don't know yet, I haven't read the other two books, but kind of like on the good side. One thing about Faith in the Fallen is that you had POVs, a lot of POVs by the villains, or what you might want to call the villains, or what you might want to call Team Kadashim. But in this one, it's almost all the POVs are, they're Ben Alim, Team Ben Alim, or maybe not even Team Ben Alim, but the good guys, the heroes. And Gwynne writes great villains too, POVs. And that's where I was kind of surprised when I was reading this through. I said, wait a minute, there are no villain POVs. So overall, I very much enjoyed this book. And just a little bit of housekeeping right now. If you like this, subscribe to my channel, click the like button, and support your local libraries. And we will talk again. Thank you.